Chapter 11, The Return.
Final chapter!
Last chapter. Let's get started. Page 135. Now you see that this story is about these two boys with similar backgrounds and an identical name, Wes Moore. But I hope that just as this story ended up representing much more to me as I wrote it, it will mean much more to you. Because when we try to better understand individual stories, it's amazing how thin those lines can be between our life and another life altogether. Compiling this account has taken hundreds of hours of interviews with my friends and family, as well as with Wes and his friends and family. Some names have been changed to protect people's identities and the quiet lives they now choose to lead. The process of tracking down these people and listening to their stories has been one of the most interesting experiences of my life. These folks have shared some of the funniest, saddest, and most thought-provoking real-life tales I've ever heard. Page 136. For over 2 years, my days would begin at 5:30 in the morning, and a cup of tea later, I would be in front of my computer, taking my notes and research and trying to piece them into a coherent story about these two very real lives. My father was a journalist, and I hope that in putting all this information together, I have echoed his passion for getting the story right. It's been eye-opening because when you start your day reading letters from someone who will spend the rest of their life in prison, or by reading articles about a police officer and father of 5 who went to work one day and did not come home, your life and problems are put into a different perspective. It's been years since my first letter to Wes. I have grown significantly since getting to know him. I'm sure he would acknowledge that he has grown as well. Some people have asked why I am still in touch with him, why we still communicate. I understand people's concerns, and let me be clear. The only victims on February 7th, 2000 were Sergeant Bruce Prothero and his family. I have never tried to make excuses or create sympathy for Wes, but even the worst decisions we make don't necessarily remove us from the circle of humanity. His story deserves to be heard, not because it is exciting or should be emulated, but because there is so much to learn from it. I didn't reach out to Wes just so I could write a book, so I don't understand why I would stop reaching out to him now that the book has been written. Besides, despite our deepening relationship, it's impossible for me to become comfortable with or forget where he, page 137, is. Every time you visit a maximum security facility, you are surrounded by reminders of where you are. The first time I visited, though, the reality of his environment was particularly striking. The words Jessup Correctional Institution were written in blood red paint on the steel front doors. I stood in front of those doors, pausing before my hand touched the knob. I felt, with a twinge of guilt, how blessed I was to be able to simply walk around in fresh air. As I paused, I savored the feeling just standing in front of the prison made me aware that my freedom was a miracle, a stroke of incredible luck that I usually didn't think twice about. I could move, explore, meet new people, and simply enjoy the sun beating down on my face. I took a deep breath and looked around before going into the windowless building. An armed guard searched and questioned each visitor. The questions were the same every time. What is your relation to the inmates? Do you have any electronic equipment or sharp items? Do you have any items you plan on passing to the inmates? Soon, I was led into a visitor's room as large as a school cafeteria. There were long tables with low metal dividers to separate the visitors from the visited. Armed guards paced from wall to wall, watching with hawk eyes. It seemed like they never blinked. All around me, reunions were taking place. One inmate, a young man in his early 20s, sat across from a woman, page 138, with the baby squirming in her arms. He was apparently meeting his child for the first time. Another inmate listened wide-eyed as his grandmother ran down a list of his friends from the neighborhood, updating him on what they'd been up to since he'd gone away. He hung on her every word. I didn't want to intrude, but I was enthralled by the intimacy of their interactions. I observed them out of the corner of my eye until a guard led Wes to the seat in front of me. Initially, the conversations with Wes felt uncomfortable, like we weren't sure what we should say to each other, but that dissipated pretty quickly. Quiet uncertainty turned into an almost therapeutic honesty. Do you ever think about how things would have been if, say, your dad had been around? I asked, leaning toward him as much as the partition between us would allow. No, I don't think about him at all, he said with a shrug. Are you serious? I asked. Yeah, I don't see why you're so surprised, he said, almost amused. Look, your father wasn't there for you because he couldn't be. My father wasn't there because he chose not to be. We're going to mourn their absence in different ways. So tell me, what impact did your father's absence have on your childhood? I'm not sure, I said, pausing to think. The major part of my life has been without him. Not having him around was something that always pained me, but I was also used to it. I was lucky to feel the presence of strong women. My mother took on a role of both parents. I guess both of ours did. But I did always feel my father's absence, yes. You still miss him? Wes asked me. Every day, all the time, I replied softly. He was the kind of man I wanted to be. I was having trouble finding my voice. Thinking about my father always amazed me because how could I love someone I barely knew so deeply, so intensely? When do you feel like you'd become a man? Wes asked, a troubled look on his face. I think it was when I first felt accountable to people other than myself. When I first cared that my actions mattered to the people other than just me. Where did I get off answering so confidently on that one? I wanted my answer to be just as straightforward as that, but I knew it wasn't. This wasn't a job interview. I didn't have to sound perfect or put together. I could be frank with Wes. To be honest, I said, exhaling, when I started taking responsibility for my behavior, I realized that I had been making a lot of mistakes. When I started to learn from these mistakes, I think that's when I became a man. I think when I started appreciating and respecting the things that shaped me instead of turning against them. What are the things that shaped you? He asked, challenging me to draw my answer out. I think my environment is what shaped me, the people who raised me, the circumstances I was brought up in, good and bad. What do you think? Page 140. He paused. I waited. Well, I agree with you, of course, he said, but I think it's more complicated than that. I think above all, we are shaped by our expectations. You and I come from the same areas, so it's not so easy to simply say environment. But other people's expectations of us matter too, even if we don't want them to. We will wind up doing what they expect us to. He paused again. If they expect us to graduate, he went on, we'll graduate. If they expect us to get a job, we will get a job. If they expect us to go to jail, then that's where we'll end up. He gestured around himself with an ironic smile. And at some point, you lose control, no matter how much you learn. I listened to him. I sympathized, but I wasn't sure I agreed entirely. It sounded like he was saying he wasn't responsible for his actions, as if they were predetermined, like fate, by those around him. I was reminded, as I frequently am, that Wes is not, by any stretch of the imagination, a dumb guy. He has made some terrible decisions in life, but to me, one of the tragedies of this situation is how, because of his choices, society was deprived of someone who could have made a valuable contribution. A guard came over to us. Our time was up. Wes didn't look back as he was led away. I walked toward the exit. Whenever those meetings ended, I found myself leaving with more questions than I'd come in with. The world outside Wes's prison cell hadn't stopped, page 141, changing since his incarceration. In 2008, Wes and his fellow inmates celebrated when Barack Obama won the presidential election. But their enthusiasm faded quickly. They realized that even something as incredible as having a Black American president in office could not change their fates. Wes also found faith and became a devout Muslim in prison. He started going to mosque services because they were the only opportunity he had to see Tony. Every Friday, they have services, and eventually he started to pay attention to the message. His faith has helped him through his time in jail. Wes loves visits from his children and his mother, Mary, but they're never long enough. Mary is raising two of Wes's children, along with her own nephew and niece, and her youngest son. Wes became a grandfather at the age of 33, during his 10th year in prison. It pains him to have so little time with family. He has to settle for hearing about their lives instead of participating in them. Wes doesn't like answering questions like, "How are you? What are you up to?" because his days are all the same. He works as a carpenter, making desks and tables, and sometimes he makes license plates. He has 2 hours of free time a day, outside time, to play basketball or talk to other inmates. Guards tell him when to wake up, when to eat, and when to go to the bathroom. So, we talk about the past. We talk about how things used to be and how things got to be where they are. Page 142. The past decade has unfolded in ways I never expected it to as a kid. Since graduating from college, I have worked a lot of different kinds of jobs. Experimenting with careers has made me realize something. If you always try to follow the path other people lay out for you, you will never excel. Following your passion and your heart is important, but hard work and putting in the effort to be good at something matters. Just like my childhood heroes in the NBA, I realized that I had to work and practice at the things I was passionate about if I wanted to have the kinds of talent that could bring on success. I have also learned how important it is to share stories, even our own. Statistics provide background, stories promote action. I wanted to make sure this book was not simply one people would pick up and say, "Cool hook." I wanted it to be a call to action. I wanted it to make people feel they could be a part of something bigger than themselves. I have continued to travel around America and the world, speaking with and learning from people about my story and Wes's, and about their own stories. My favorite part about this journey has been hearing from audiences. People tell me about the versions of each Wes they've known, or even the Wes they've been themselves. The question that still comes up the most is one that made me want to write this book in the first place. What was the thing that made the difference between you and the other Wes? And the truth is that I don't know. It's never that simple. Why did the lives of two people with similar beginnings diverge so drastically? Why did he go one way and I go another? The answer isn't something I can fully grasp, and that is because there is no one thing. Our lives and ourselves depend on an unpredictable mix of genetics, environments, and straight up luck. Family lineage matters, education matters, environment matters, and high expectation matters. What captured my attention about Wes's story in those newspaper articles at first was simply his name. It was the other details that kept me and refused to let me go. I did learn, though, the chilling truth that Wes's story could have been mine. The tragedy is that my story could have been his. According to the national nonprofit group America's Promise, the way many governors decide the number of beds they need in prison facilities is by examining the reading scores of third graders. Elected officials have figured out that kids reading below their grade level by third grade wind up in jail when they get older. My reading skills in the third grade were far below where they should have been. According to these statistics, I could have been destined for a bed in a correctional facility. I felt handcuffs on my wrists at 11 years old. I began picking and choosing which days were worthwhile to go to school before I even hit my teenage years. I'm not proud of the many things I've done. I disappointed people in ways that still embarrass me. I hurt people who did nothing wrong, page 144. I embraced stereotypes, and I gave people who were really rooting for me a reason to give up. But there were people who saw positive things in me that I didn't even see in myself, and I am thankful for them. Teachers, mentors, ministers, family members, and everyday citizens who cared for my family and me just when we needed it the most. I was given a chance to fight the harrowing statistics that surround kids who grow up like me. Through my own experiences, I've become convinced that you have the potential to control your own life, even if the odds are against you. Learning the details of Wes's story helped me understand my life and my choices. And I like to think that my story helped him understand his. Ultimately, our experience shed some light on the whole generation of young men, kids like us who came of age in a chaotic and violent time. In this book, I wanted to figure out what lessons our stories could offer to the next generation. Today's young men and women will wind up at some of the same crossroads Wes and I did. Wes agreed to share his experiences in this book so that others could learn from his story and choose a different way. I wanted to tell my own story for a similar reason. I hope that by reading this, you can learn from both our failures and our successes. Adulthood can pounce on you all of a sudden, especially if you're growing up in some of the roughest cities in America. Suddenly, you find yourself entrusted with responsibilities that force you to get serious about your behavior. Some of us are forced to carry the burden of others. At the age, 145, of 16, my friend Justin was left in charge of his dying mother. Wes's mother, Mary, was caring for a baby at the same young age. Others have the opposite situation. They are alone and left to fend for themselves. From an early age, I was crushed by my father's death. I had wanted him to be there, to guide me, to shape me into the kind of man he was. It took me years to realize that in many ways, he did shape me. I became a man despite his absence. In fact, his absence made me grow up fast. When he died, my family and I couldn't just fall apart. There wasn't anything we could do to change what happened. We were left to cope with it. I had to toughen up young, we all did, for the sake of the family. Along the way, I've made mistakes. There are times when I've been irresponsible and ungrateful. I've been so insecure that I felt as if I were an outline of myself for other people to fill in. I haven't always known which battles are worth a fight and which I should ignore, but I've had the freedom to make those mistakes and the freedom to seek redemption for them. Sometimes it seems like the world doesn't exist outside your city, your home, your room, even your own head. You may make decisions based on what you see around you. You may follow in the footsteps of whichever role models are available. A stumble down the wrong path or a shy step down the right one can start up a new, surprising journey. It's both exciting and disturbing to realize that a single choice There we go. A single choice can give you another life altogether. How did you know which choices are the right ones? It takes patience. It takes patience. It takes practice. It takes people to show you the way. It's asking a lot of yourself to try to make it completely on your own. The most important thing that happened to me was not being physically transported. The moves from Baltimore to the Bronx to Valley Forge didn't change my way of thinking. You take yourself with you wherever you go. What changed was that I realized how blessed I was to be surrounded with people who supported and encouraged me to work hard and succeed. Sometimes I didn't see them. Sometimes I didn't recognize them. But I know that my best decisions have been made when I took input and advice from people I really respected and admired. It started with my mom, grandparents, uncles, and aunts, but it led to a string of role models and mentors in military school, in college, and finally in my career. They all kept pushing me to see more than what was directly in front of me. With their help, I could finally see the boundless possibilities of the wider world. even the unexplored possibilities within myself. It turned out that I didn't need to let other people's low expectations form me. I didn't need to become a part of a negative statistic. My heroes told me, when people think they have you figured out, prove them wrong. Direct the energy you get from frustration and anger into your own projects, creativity, and hopefully success. I think the best we adults can do for young people is give you a chance to make the best decisions possible by providing the information, the tools, and the support you need to see the positive in yourself, no matter what your circumstances are. People taught me that being black, or relatively poor, or fatherless, being from Baltimore or the Bronx, would never define or limit me. In other words, they helped me to discover what it means to be free. My only wish, and I know Wes feels the same, is that the young men and women who come after us will know this same freedom. It's up to us, all of us, to make a way for each other. And that concludes Discovering Wes Moore.